there's this idea that there are good men and there are bad men and there are really bad men. Mm-hmm. Totally agree. I've got the optics of a macaque monkey blindfolded on LSD when it comes to certain members of our species, but when it comes to men, I grew up in a big group of boys, et cetera, a big group of men. I get it. That statement is true. There are great ones, there are ones, and then there are like really bad dudes. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about manosphere, I would say if I had my way, manosphere would apply to just the really bad ones because that name has become synonymous with really bad men. Okay, we can come back to that perhaps. But there is this issue that no one is allowed to say there's wonderful femininity, there's women with issues, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's bad women. You're not allowed to say it. The only women that I can have that conversation with are lesbians. They were the ones who explained to me there are truly bad women. And I said, well, how come no one talks about that except lesbians? And they said, because we are living in a time now where men talking about women or having things they wish for women to do differently itself is seen as toxic. That women feel, this is what I was told, so I'm regurgitating, that they've suffered so much at the hands of men that we need like a good 20 or 30 years before we're ready to get to that conversation. Yeah. Which, of course, for young men growing up, just makes them feel like, okay, it's all on us. And that's good. Like agency, advocacy for one's own life is important. Stay out of the really bad men category and ideally the not so good men category too. But the polarization, I think, is set by the fact that, sure, we can talk about toxic masculinity, we can talk about the male crisis, but why aren't we talking about the suicide rate? Well, because women's issues, I think in a good way, we're still thinking that we need to protect and provide for the women and the children in our society. We're holding that as in the highest regard. Like they get the life rafts on the Titanic when the Titanic goes down. So, it's complicated. And there's a lot of off-limits terms, and I'm glad that they're coming up today just organically, because those off-limits terms, I think, are the potential bridges between where we sit now, where we look at men and we go, oh, shit, they're a mess. Some of them are just like downright awful. We look over here and we go, man, they're really dissatisfied. The assumption is if a woman is dissatisfied or somehow not doing well, that a man failed. Mm-hmm. That's a presumption that a lot of people make. I don't make that presumption. And I can look back to times in my youth where 90s narrative probably fed that a bit. But now I think we need to really pull back the veil and go take a real hard look at ourselves and try and, do this mesh that we're talking about.
Yeah, the only way you get there is with data. So from 1945 to 2000, America registered a third of the world's economic growth, a third of its prosperity, with only 5% of the population. So we had 6x the growth of the rest of the world, right? And within that 6x, the majority of that prosperity was sequestered to the 1/3 of the population that were white, male, and heterosexual. It was just a lot harder to participate in that uplift if you weren't in that group. So men of my generation, born with my sexual orientation, skin color, and gender, arguably had 15 to 18x the wins in their sales. The question is, should a young man now pay the price for my privilege? And I understand the gag reflex when I start talking or advocating for men, because they look at me and they said, you had unfair advantage. 100% guilty as charged. But now a young man who is 4 times as likely to kill himself, 3 times as likely to be addicted, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated, and men of my generation aren't stepping up and providing the mentorship or voting for the programs that might take a little bit of money away from my generation to support all young people and bring them up. And most of the programs and policies I advocate for would advocate for all young people. The average 7-year-old is 72% wealthier than the 7-year-old 40 years ago. The 25-year-old is 24% less wealthy. And then every day it's speedballed with 110 notifications telling them that they're failing. And what do you know? They're the most obese, depressed, and anxious generation we've had in a long time. And there really isn't an honest conversation. And I've said this on stage and it gets some pushback. I'll say, I think women make better managers. I think that they are more emotionally in touch with other people. They have higher EQ. I think they'll probably make better doctors and lawyers. I think their attention to detail genetically or anthropologically, whatever you want to call it, their bedside manner, and there's more women in both law school and medical school now, especially medical school. If I say that, women are better managers, will make better doctors, nodding, everyone, the women agree and the guys will look around and go nod, right? If I say men on average make better entrepreneurs, And that's not to say that women shouldn't be offered the same opportunities, and they haven't been, right? 95% of the capital has been not only allocated to men, but the majority of it has been allocated by men who went to one or two schools, Harvard and Stanford. I don't feel safe around you.
Who doesn't feel safe around you?
It's fine to say women make better X, Y, and Z. To say men are better at anything.
Well, if you
better
said it on
combat
X,
soldiers.
Let's be honest. If you said it on X, everyone would be like, "Cool, males make better entrepreneurs." If you said it in a room, again, I don't want to make this political, but we can't avoid this. If you said it among a more center to right-leaning crowd, I think you'd probably get less pushback, also from women.
I think that's fair.
I'm not saying it's who you're hanging out with.
Yeah, well,
I barely hang out with anybody, so I've got a very small world.
But to your point, if you go to the Democratic National website, dnc.org, and they changed this, but I talked about this a lot on CNN, left-leaning website. They said they have a page saying who we serve, and they outlined 16 special interest groups: veterans, the disabled, Black Americans, Native Americans, seniors. And I added it up, and it was 74% of the population. And when you say you're advocating for 74% of the population, you're not advocating for 74%. You're discriminating against 26%. And basically, the only people they didn't mention were young men. So I understand the notion that men have had so much disproportionate advantage that there needs to be a catch-up period, but I would argue it's gone a little bit overboard. Our school system, K through 12, I would argue is biased against boys. A boy is twice as likely to be suspended on a behavior-adjusted basis as a girl. A Black boy 5 times as likely. 70 to 80% of K through 12 teachers are women. Who do people naturally advocate for? The people that remind them of themselves at that age. 7 in 10 high school valedictorians are girls. It's now 60-40 female-male in college. And so the bottom line is we leveled the playing field, and there's a little bit of bias, and women have totally blown by men. Fine, more power to them. But what do we do now that young men, just quite frankly, don't have obvious paths to prosperity, and young people aren't as economically prosperous relative as they used to be, and young men are disproportionately evaluated in society, especially in the mating market, on their economic viability? And I get a ton of pushback saying, no, I'm just looking for an emotionally in touch male. I think that is such bullshit.
No, it's total bullshit.
There's still economic hypergamy. Educational hypergamy has leveled out. There's a lot of women who will marry a guy who didn't go to college, or educational hypergamy has vastly reduced. But in cities where women make as much as men, so there's an equality, if you find a couple, twice as many couples, the male earns more money than the woman. Economic hypergamy is still an absolutely full force. So if we don't figure out a way to level up all young people economically such that there's more paths for economic viability for young men, I think it's just going to tear at our society. We're going to have lower birth rates, fewer people to support the very expensive programs, which make up 40% of our government spending now on people over the age of 65. And we're going to have real issues. And people say, well, that's repackaged violence, that men are more violent. I'm like, no, it's just the reality. If you look at every unstable, violent society in history, it always has one thing at the core of it, and that is a group of young men with a lack of economic or romantic opportunities. I don't care if it's Weimar, Germany, or some of the most unstable places in the Middle East or Africa. When you have the most dangerous person in the world is a young man who is lonely and broke, and we are producing way too many of them. And by the way, I don't think the remedy here is affirmative action for men. I just think that's too politicized. But we have to stop transferring wealth from people their age to people my age. Why the hell are we transferring every year $1.3 trillion from a generation that is the most anxious, depressed, and obese in American history to the wealthiest generation in the history of the planet, called Social Security? That's a third rail in politics. I'm not suggesting anyone should die in poverty. Should you and I get Social Security?
No, we don't need it. No, I don't need it.
I mean,
don't need it.
Probably a third of seniors really don't need Social Security. But you get near that, you can't get elected, right? 40% of all government spending is going to people over the age of 65. It's going to be 50% within 10 years. We spend more money on ICE than we spend on children. I mean, it's just, there's my generation, I don't even think of us, I'm on the edge of Gen X baby boomer. The best way to describe my generation would be the vampire generation. We were never drafted into war. We never really had to serve. And what has my economic complexion been in America? Unprecedented prosperity, but the lowest taxes in modern history. So a lot of these solutions I just think are common sense. We need to do away Social Security tax, right? 6% up to 160,000. So a kid working for me making 150 or 160K, good living, they pay $9,000. I make a lot more than that. I pay $9,000 because it tops out at 160 grand. Why does that make any sense? Two biggest tax deductions, mortgage interest rate and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People our age. Who rents and makes their money from current income? All the dudes in this office, the young kids, right? We are literally transferring trillions of dollars from young people to old people. And we wonder why young men feel anxious when they are disproportionate. 75% of women say economic viability is key to a mate. It's only 25% of men. Women still look at men as economic providers. And so you have this entire generation of young men who feel like they have no purpose, no on-ramps to the middle class, and are being evaluated on a set of criteria that get harder and harder for them each year. And then this like unbelievable set of expectations that they're taught they should have, because it seems like everyone else is making $1 million selling ETH, or is in amazing shape, or has a ridiculously hot boyfriend or girlfriend, and has artist passes to Coachella. So it'd be shocking if they weren't depressed and obese.